Welcome to the Star Chamber. I'm Ryan Swayze, a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and the founder and president of the Walk the Talk Foundation, a nonprofit that advocates for and advises currently serving and former military service members going through the arduous journey of administrative processes and investigations in our government.
And I am Francescagraham, a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Advisor for the Walk the Talk Foundation. For all our returning guests, welcome back. And for our new listeners, thank you for tuning in. Before we begin this week's topic, please do not forget to hit that subscribe button, check out our Walk the Talk Foundation website, and hit that donate button if you think we're doing a good job. Also, check out our newsletter, the DoD Times Redacted, on all the socials, including LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Facebook. Links in the description. All right, Star Chamber listeners, let's get started. All right, welcome back, all of our Star Chamber listeners. Today we have another exciting episode, and it's especially exciting because we have with us our second opportunity to have a guest on our show, something which we hope to continue many, many, many times in the future. So if there's anybody listening to this podcast and you're like, you know what, I want to talk about some BS that happened in the DoD or the Coast Guard, send us a note.
Looking at you, Joe Rogan. We're looking at you still.
Looking at you, Joe Rogan.
Still haven't gotten that thumbs up.
Or Sean Ryan or Elon Musk, any of you guys.
What's up with that?
I know. So anyways, today our guest that we have on the show, distinguished gentleman, who is very comfortable speaking about himself because he was a pilot.
Can't even get through the intro.
So his name, he is a Colonel retired Air Force pilot. His name is Doug, call sign Cinco de Mayo, and he was an F-16 pilot in the Air Force.
So sexy.
And the plane, obviously. And I am going to, before we get started too far into the interview, so Cinco is still employed by the government in some shape, form, or capacity, which we won't get into all of the gory details per se, because it'd be too much. But because of that, I do want to read just a quick disclaimer up front to make sure that all of the Poindexters in the group who want to try to punish Cinco for speaking publicly and exercising his First Amendment rights have no leg to stand on. So, just up front, the opinions and views expressed by guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not represent the official policies, positions, or endorsements of the U.S. Air Force, the Department of Defense, or any other government entity. This discussion is intended for informational purposes only and should not be construed as reflecting the official stance of any military or governmental organization. What do we say, Ryan?
Suck it,
Poindexters. Exactly. All right. So, with that said, Ryan, did you have any opening comments before we turn it over to Cinco to introduce himself?
Yeah, I expect two things out of this show. Of course, a lively discussion that highlights all the shortcomings, deficiencies in our current system. And number two, a lot of shooting our watches. Pew!
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh my God. For all you non-pilot people, I found this out through my dubious association with Ryan Swayze, that pilots like watches, big watches, with a lot of things on them turning around in places. It's very strange. So anyways, all that said, Cinco, thank you so much for being on the show. It's truly an honor to have you here. Yeah. And we are excited for this episode. So just to kick it off briefly, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Count and Jessica, I want to thank you first for what you're doing. You're doing an incredible service for our military personnel and veterans. And I'm so thankful to be on the show with you and that you invited me.
Thanks.
I am a resident or came from Mendham, New Jersey. That's where I come from. And my family moved in to North Jersey from Italy and Germany around the turn of the century, last century. And we've been there ever since. And ever since I wanted could think. Ever since I had a memory, I wanted to fly an airplane. And so I planned how to go to do that. And I remember my grandfather is a Navy guy. Not that he was in the Navy, but he was a merchant Marine. And I wanted to get in like everybody else in 1987 Top Gun and go in the Navy. And my grandfather looked at me and he said, "Do you want to fly airplanes?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Go into the Air Force." I said, "Okay." So I was a little cross player, and I actually got in early to the academy because I got blue chipped. Otherwise, I would have been tough. So went there, played ball, had a great time. Went to pilot training in Shepherd, and then from there to Kunsan. I'm just going to list out my assignments. I met my wife along the way in pilot training, and that was
Oh,
awesome,
that's
of
awesome.
course. And then went to Kunsan, Korea, when she didn't think that was awesome, but when we got there, it was pretty cool. And then from there, went to Hill, and then to Luke to fly with the Taiwan squadron. And then I made a diversion from there to New Jersey Guard. I was in the Jersey Guard for about a year. Went from there, that's a long story, that's another show. Went from there out to Fort Leavenworth for 2 years to school, and then to Osan, and then to Shaw for 4.5 years, where I commanded the 55th Fighter Squadron and Roll'em. And then I went from there to DC, to the Industrial College, then to Italy to command an AOC for 2.5 years. And then I came. And so in Italy, there's another show right there. There was a thing that just happened at Shaw in 2012, which is kind of the before and after point of what we would call now wokeness / introduction of that kind of accountability in the Air Force, which is another time. Now, went from there to Maxwell, and was the director of doctrine and then the vice commander of the LeMay Center, where I helped to introduce, I had a great fortune to work with General Saltzman, introduce airspace and cyber into military operations along with the EMS. So combining all this together in multi-domain operations. And during that time, I got to started to fly with the 187th Fighting Wing. They invited me over after we had this amazing air show here highlighting the F-35, and I knew some guys over there. And then one day I was in my office here and I got a call, 2019, "Would you like to be the wing commander?" I said, my jaw dropped through the floor. I said, "Absolutely." So there's this incredible trick you can do because I know the regs so well. 10 USC 12145 paragraph D, it allows you to apply as a retired person back into the Air Force under a program called indispensability. Wow. And that's how I came to be the fighter wing commander at the 187th Fighter Wing Danley Field.
And when you say wing, just for our non-Air Force or non-military people, what does that actually mean, wing? Like what level of command is that?
I would say it's under brigade, more like, and it's above battalions more. And you're going to correct me on this, Cheska, but it's 1,400-ish people in this particular wing, 20 F-16s at the time. And we had 2 tenant units as well. So it's a pretty extensive operation. It is at typically what you see for the Guard. You have a tenant unit at a local airport. In this case, it was Danley Field, a 99-year lease for like $1 or something crazy, like you would see anywhere. The town wants this there, and it's been here a long time. And it has a legacy. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so I'm just trying to get a sense of because you just listed off your background, and I always do love whenever anybody mentions Leavenworth, they always are very specific to say they were at school at Leavenworth, which for those of you, you have to. For those of you who don't know, Fort Leavenworth is where the main military prison is for men. I don't know where women go, but women go somewhere different. So if you have to be specific. So I'm just listening to your background. You've had numerous commands, you've commanded at numerous echelons, so every level of command that you could command at. You've helped write doctrine, you're helping with building our alliances and partnerships overseas. So you have a pretty good career in your back pocket. Would that be fair to say? And then so kind of the question with the wings, so just to give context to our listeners, about how many wings are in the Air Force?
Yeah, that's a great question. Anymore with so many cutbacks, Count, you're going to help me with this. I think there's about 50 now. We used to have like 90-ish, 80 to 90. Now they've been cut in half since the Gulf War. So those are fighter wing, what we call fighter wing equivalents. The Guard actually has 40% of all the combat power that's out there, and manned by full-time, part-time, both civilian, active, what we call AGR, active Guard Reserve. So it's a real mix of people. So when you really boil it down, it's 40% of the combat power is a good number to hold on to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you were out of, we'll say 50 something of the chosen for that year for the entire '06 colonel population in the Air Force. You were chosen as a wing commander. It's a pretty big deal. It's a huge deal. And you had under
Very
your
blessed.
command, like, yeah, you had in your command over 1,000 airmen, contractors, civilians, etc. And then how many aircraft did you have? F-16s?
We had 20, and that's with attrition reserve. So it's 18 assigned, and you had a couple extra for whatever, just because you
Just
needed
because
some, because you
you
always
need
have, God forbid, accidents.
you need spare parts.
Right.
Probably.
No kidding.
Oh, I'm sure. And so that command specifically, I just want to touch on this very briefly because this is our first National Guard conversation we've had, and I don't want to get too in the weeds right at this moment, but generally, when you think about military people, they fall under this thing called Title 10, which is essentially a chapter inside of the United States Code. So you have Title 1 through I think it's Title 70 or something, right? So Title 10 generally deals with the Department of Defense and the military forces inside of the Department of Defense. And those are all that's where all of the authorities come from. That's where the laws are derived. The Uniform Code of Military Justice is part of Title 10. That's the military legal system, judicial legal punishment system, investigatory system, so on and so forth. But then you also have, say, Title 50, which is for your intelligence community people, because we have specific things. And you have this other thing called Title 32. So you were a Title 32 person as well as a Title 10 person. So can you kind of just very briefly explain what that means to be a Title 32 person?
Absolutely. There are a few flavors, but the basic one is called a drill status guardsman. This would be akin to a traditional guardsman. It's renamed DSG. So that is your in-state. Title 32 corresponds to the reserve component of which the guard is part that belongs under the state. Title 32 in the state belongs under the auspices of the governor of the state as a part-time person. And every person in the guard, whether you're full-time or part-time, has a drill status guardsman designation. So militarily, you fall under the governor. Then you can go on orders. And if you go on orders as a Title 32 drill status guardsman, you become a Title 10. You have Title 10 orders, even though it's still under Title 32, and you can go on active orders or you can be on guard orders, and that's called active guard reserve as Title 32. And then what we used to have is Title 5, which are civilians, which is throughout the federal government. And back probably 4 or 5 decades ago, they combined Title 32 part-time and Title 5 civilian together in what they call a Title 32 dual status guardsman technician. And so you are at one time, you have on your orders or on your plate, you are a civilian personnel that can easily transition to military orders very quickly, and they combine it together. Now, there's only a few of those in the reserves, but there are a lot of them in the Air National Guard, for example, and the National Guard. I know it's confusing. Trust me, took me a long time to crack through that, but just to give you an idea, there were probably 7 different statuses I dealt with as a wing commander when we called people into duty.
So, in terms of your status in the chain of command, Cinco, when you're Title 32, your chain of command ends at the governor, correct?
It does, militarily. But as it turns out, Count, when your Title 32 dual status, civilian side ends at Secretary of the Air Force.
Okay. And then when you're Title 10 activated, it's a traditional chain of command like any other active duty service member, correct?
That's correct. Then you become activated federally, like what President Trump is doing at the border. He's probably ordering units. Now, I don't know this for sure, but were he to order units, federalize them, they become on active orders.
All right. Now, there's a key element and a key player in the Guard system, and that's the Adjutant General. Can you talk about their role, how they become that, and what role they play, especially as it pertains to those people under Title 32 authorities?
Sure. The Adjutant General is the governor's assigned director of all military operations in the state. This does not necessarily have to be a person that's ever been in uniform before, but through the federal recognition process, they become so. Depends on the state's constitution. Alabama, for example, directs by code that this person will be part of the federal system. They will be federally recognized. They will be able to be federally activated and command troops. So that would pretty much necessitate a person who has had military experience for a while. In essence, this person lives on the governor's staff, is full-time Title 10, I should say Title 32 person, earning military pay, but is federally recognized. Again, you're crossing the streams here, but it is this person's on the governor's staff, but they also have a military component that goes all the way up to the Secretary of the Air Force as well.
So it's conceivable and probably not unprecedented that the governor picks one of their boys, girls, puts them on staff, throws a 2-star uniform on them, and yesterday they couldn't spell tag, and now they is one.
That is potentially possible count. I have not seen that, but I would say as in any person in power and leadership, they're going to pick people they know that they can trust, and that may not necessarily be the person that is who you would think would be there, but it's the person they trust, and they have that authority to do that.
Okay, but generally speaking, from what you've seen over the course of many years, it's person who's grown up in that guard state and has floated up through the ranks.
Yes, that would be very typical.
Okay.
And I think we didn't cover this up front, Cinco, but you are currently in Alabama, and the
Yes.
unit where all of this, where you were the wing commander, is in Alabama. And so I think something you said a second ago that I think is important to understand when it comes to National Guard is the rules that the National Guard must follow when they are not under Title 10 status are the Constitution of that state, as you said. So the military law of that state. And every state has a different military law. So a National Guardsman in New York or a National Guardsman in Colorado or, say, California does not necessarily follow the same rules that a National Guardsman or does not have the same restrictions even that a National Guardsman in Alabama has. And so for our purposes, as we're talking about our purposes, plus even the legislators, let's be honest, or the inspectors general of any organ, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the whatever, being a part of that spaghetti bowl that is the National Guard of rules and regulations and who the heck knows, it can get pretty stinking daunting about what actually applies where and when. Would you say that's a fair statement?
I would. And so I have taken active duty oaths for 29 years and 3 months prior to going to the Guard. And actually, the Guard oath of office is both to the United States Constitution and the state constitution.
Oh,
so
interesting.
again, you're doing both. Now, here's what I will tell you where you really find the distinction is who you can appeal to. Title 32, drill status guardsmen can only appeal to the state, except under extreme circumstances or unusual circumstances for instance, maybe an EO complaint, but typically all of that stays in the state and it stops with the governor. That is part-time. When you go on dual status technicians and you are in a civilian status, now in the 2016 National Defense Authorization Act allows dual status technicians to appeal to the Secretary of the Air Force under certain conditions, which is what I did. If you are Title 10 or on Title 10 orders, you will go to the Secretary of the Air Force ultimately.
Yep. And all of that is going to be relevant once we get especially into your story. So you're on our show not just because you're an awesome F-16 pilot with an awesome call sign, not just for those reasons, and not just because, Ryan's an F-16 pilot with an awesome call sign. That's the intel officer talking mess, by the way, in case anybody's wondering or is it all confused.
All the way.
All the way. Darn right. So anyways, so you're in command. You are a very strange Title 32/Title 5 dual status technician. You are potentially also a Title 10 person. And something happens that derails this so far up to this point stellar career that you have had. So what happened?
That's a great question. We're still unraveling that. And I would have to go back to why I was hired. And it's this. Under that that code I read you earlier, which I won't say again, but I was hired because the Alabama Guard had a special need for a seasoned fighter pilot, highly experienced in operational strategic planning, to bring in the F-35, to engage in operational planning for agile combat employment, how we're going to employ our forces, especially against China. And the third part would be what we now call strategic competition. And that is why I was brought there for that. So in the wing, I came in, this is crazy. I retired from active duty in September 22. In November 22, I was sworn in. Actually, I retired and swore into the Alabama Guard in the same ceremony. So that was unique. And then I spent the next 6 months in shadowing the wing commander. And these are people I've known for several years. Some of them I've known for a long time. So it wasn't just out of the blue here. And so it was 6 months of preparation. And on Cinco de Mayo of 2021, no kidding, took command of the wing and gave kind of an impassioned speech about what we were going to do. I laid out exactly what I just said we were going to do. So there were no surprises. And a lot of stuff happened at once. We started to do some really good things. We engaged in our strategy. I really, to this day, I think the people really enjoyed and really were on board with the strategy at the worker bee level, right? And some of the leadership maybe or may not were on board. But we go along, we're getting some good inputs. Senator Tuberville comes down in June, a month after take command, and we show him the wing and we show him what we need. COVID has set us back, doubled costs essentially for our construction. We need your help, sir. And his staff and the state work a $20 million input into our budget through the NDAA, which finishes our maintenance building, which, as you know, Count, is absolutely critical to the F-35. You got to do it because you got all the computer equipment, right? And so we get that. Then I start engaging with Senator Shelby's staff to get more money, another 35 million, which takes about a year. I'll get back to that in a second. But in the meantime, you got COVID that hit. And the implementation of that, I was looking over my notes, was very difficult in that there was a lot of pressure to execute. And the governor had not put out a directive to do so because she didn't want to commit like many other governors, right? I mean, that was a hard call. So we have calls to do it without orders inside the Air Force of how we're going to implement religious or medical exemptions. And so I waited. And I think that caused some ire with some folks. And that's about, I'm going to go into right now with that. We can talk about that in a little later, but I think that kind of started things. The other thing is I had briefed the governor's staff and also the tag on space and related to the F-35 and how we were going to integrate and ACE and working on agile combat and working that with the LeMay Center. And I think the outside look from outside the base in perhaps created a little bit of discomfort. And there was some meetings downtown that I took part in that perhaps some people started talking that I can't really say what happened, what they were saying, but all I can say is there were some political infighting going on that perhaps I got in the middle of, unintended, and not to the point that in my experience would have created an issue, but I started to feel some pressure. And as I went along, we're about a year into my command and we're doing an exercise for agile combat. It took us 6 months to get ACC, Air Combat Command, to allow us to do an agile combat employment exercise, and they allowed us to do it. Well, we did a lot of deep dives into the wing, looking at security, et cetera. And I think everything together, maybe I, as a person that's coming from the outside, I have figured out that I'm a change agent and a disruptor. I always have been. I like to make things happen because we need to get ready to fight. And I could see that perhaps we could use some improvement in that area. I build strategies, I take risk, and I solve wicked problems, and I enjoy doing that. And perhaps that was a little bit too much for this unit. And guys, that's the only thing that I could see, because I never had any negative feedback as far as paperwork goes. There's nothing written down. There's nothing in my record. I had some, discussions about, hey, you may want to chill out a little bit on some of the things, kind of that normal talk that you would get from your boss, like, okay, you're doing great, but, and I did get great feedback. As a matter of fact, 3 months before I was removed, I had a number one strated officer performance report. So I had no reason to think there was anything dreadful going on.
So
And
one day you show up to the office and you're told, "Hey, you know what? We're removing you out of command." So what was that? How did that look and how did that happen? What were you told?
I was on leave and I got a note from the adjutant general, show up in her office on Tuesday, which is 2 days. And I explained that I was on leave. I was told there was no record of that. And I got a chill up my spine. And I
Mhm.
said, I better get down there. And I got in my car. I was in New Jersey and I drove all the way back.
Oh my.
And
Wow.
that morning, on Tuesday morning, I showed up at the wing with two armed guards, took me up to her office.
Oh my
I
God.
was told I was being removed. I asked many times why throughout the discussion. I was never given an answer. Escorted from there to my office in front of the wing. This was a Tuesday morning at about 10 o'clock. People were watching me pack up my office, and I was escorted off base. And I was barred from any Alabama Guard facility. And I was restricted from showing up at work, even though I was given another job and I was in military status for another 10 months. And I was never given a reason. And I cannot tell you why I was removed.
So you were never given a document saying you are being removed because of.
No.
And what was your so this gets back to the conversation we were having earlier where I was asking Cinco about Title 5, Title 32. What was your at that moment in time on Tuesday when you were on leave after you drove down from New Jersey? What status were you on?
Very clearly, and I'm just going to read them out because you got to quote this stuff. And so it's 10 United States Code 10216 and 32 United States Code 709 clearly state that a Title 32 dual status military technician is always on civil status unless they are on orders. And I was not on orders at any time. I was not on orders at any time that would have caused a problem that I was told on this military status, you did this, therefore it's for cause. None of that. And by the way, all of that violated federal law because you have to go through an extensive process before
Yep.
you remove a civilian.
Yep.
So, Cinco, after you pick your jaw up off the floor and kind of get your wits about you that you've just been completely blindsided, talk to me about what you're thinking in terms of the reattack. What are your avenues of recourse given your status that you or any guardsman would have at that point?
Now, there is no precedent for what I was about to do because I was the first person to challenge the system under the new law, the 2016 National Defense Authorization Act, which he read and written into the law allowed Title 32 dual status technicians to appeal to the Merit System Protection Board from a state. And I was the first one to do it. There is no precedent. So that's why this has taken so long. So I tell people this was like I turned into Gollum for about 6 months. This was hard. And I think you have talked to enough people to know that when you are torn away from your tribe, it hurts. And I have a very good friend here who is in the VA, and we talked a lot
Mhm.
about this. And perhaps this is the reason why so many of our veterans do things to themselves. And I did not get to that point, but I can see when you're torn away from your tribe, it hurts. So I eventually got a call to say, hey, contact this person. He's a retired '06, Navy '06, and he's up in Birmingham. So I drove up to see him and we had a very good discussion. He explained that point that this would be precedent. There's no guarantee, but we could press ahead and see what happens. And I was like, absolutely, we're doing it.
So was there so you have armed guards escorting you to your desk. You're the adjutant general. So for our listeners, when we say tag, we're talking about that acronym, the adjutant general. So that's the tag. The tag refuses to tell you why you're being removed. You're just being removed. Go clean out your desk. You're on Title 32 dual status technician orders, which means you fall under Title 32. military, as well as Title V, civilian, federal civilian. And was there ever an investigation that was done against you? Did you receive a relief for cause evaluation? Like, what is the paperwork trail that was created, if any, to justify this action?
If you look up into the night sky and you see blackness, that's what my paper trail was. Nothing. And I stopped there. That's no joke.
Yeah. Okay. So you begin this merit, it's the MSBP, correct? Merit
Merit
Systems
System Protection Board.
Yeah,
Protection Board.
MSPB.
Yeah, MSPB,
Yep.
which has existed for Title V government civilians for a while. It's new to the Guard. So you are an American pioneer here, trailblazer.
Ah,
How long have you been on that journey and where are you at in it currently?
So I've been on this since October 3rd of 2022. It took, I think by the time that I had written my responses, so here was my response. With all respect, I was on civilian orders according to the law, and I didn't have the laws at the time. And oh, by the way, here's my stamped and signed Alabama Guard time card, which says I was on civilian status because your staff signed it, proving it. And I was not on military status, nor do I have any discussion about what cause was. And if you look at this AFI 51509, it says you have to have justification for cause, and there was none. So in essence, I was never really removed as the wing commander legally, and that's my argument when I go up to as I'm working with SecAF. So going forward with this, we started in October of 22, we started the appeal, and I could tell right away the game plan was to delay, delay, delay. And this stretched it out as long as possible, and it was to make sure that my time in service expired. I actually had some people tell me that 10 months later, and that was in the military side. So they achieved their objective there, which is not a huge deal because there is recourse. And so in February of 2024, after 16 months of deliberation, the Merit System Protection Board judge ruled that I was to be reinstated as the wing commander of the 187th Fighter Wing.
But kind of like the law and order piece we typically talked about on this show, there's the thing to have a decision, but then that has to be followed up with the action, right?
That's right. So it's true. The argument is, well, he's no longer in military status, so we can't reinstate him. Very true. So for 10 months, I was exactly what the judge says. I was both civilian and military, and that went from August of 22 to end of May in 23. After that, I am no longer in the military because my what's called the mandatory separation date has expired, and I can't be reinstated as a military member in the Alabama Guard to fulfill the judge's order of dual status. However, there are caveats which say the Alabama Guard has to provide me a job since I was not retirement eligible, and they haven't done that either. And that is as a technician only, as civilian technician. I know it gets very complicated. So my current status is that I was retaliated against, and I've appealed to the Office of Special Counsel, which has my case. And that is a level above the Merit System Protection Board. So they have it and they're looking at it right now. And then I'm also appealing higher to Secretary of the Air Force because that's what the law says I can do for the military side.
And so even the fact that the Office of Special Counsel has your case implies that they have jurisdiction over your case, which implies that you are a Title 32 dual status technician. Dual status meaning the Title 5 piece, because the Office of Special Counsel military members do not have access to the Office of Special
Right.
Counsel. Only federal civilians
Yeah.
do. Title 5 federal civilians do. So
Yeah.
in this whole process, did you, and I've never actually asked you this question before, but I'm guessing the answer is yes. Did you file an IG complaint? Did you contact your congressman? So what other things have you done, and what are the results of those things in our glorious administrative system?
So I worked with Senator Tuberville's office, and I would like to keep some of those details for another time, just because we're
Yep.
working through those. But I did, and yes, it was that was very helpful. And I did not go through the IG because having experienced what I did on active duty from my time at Shaw Air Force Base and the CDI, the Commander Directed Investigation that went there for the operations group, I decided this was not a system that was going to work for me because I have not seen it work in this case. And the reason I didn't is because I tell people that I quote Matthew 12, it's 22. And basically it says the Pharisees are looking at Jesus and he says, this fellow can cast out demons. He must be one of them. And Jesus says, no, any kingdom that's divided against itself is brought to desolation, right? Every city divided against itself will not stand. And I'm not quoting it right, but what that means is an organization that has an investigative component investigating itself will probably not work as advertised. As a matter of fact, if you look at the success that comes out of that organization, it's not that great. And even when you're looking at the MSPB success rates, they aren't unless you have a very, very solid case. So it was not advantageous for me to go through the IG in any way, nor did I.
So that's pretty telling. You have an '06 fighter pilot, a cool guy. So you're one of the cool guys. Like the entire Air Force is designed around the fighter capability, right? Like quite literally. I mean, there's other airplanes too, obviously, but really it's the fighter capability. So you have an '06 fighter pilot, Air Force Academy grad, who makes a conscious decision not to file with the IG because you know it's going to fail you.
I have a very strong suspicion I was advised not to by some senior folks. You have to remember as well, and I know you guys do, this is a very political thing. It involves state politics, federal politics. There's the headquarters space command in discussion, right? This is a problem. And if you go through the IG, they can kind of take the information. It's like internal affairs, right? I mean, just ask you how much I trust what Jesus says, right? A house divided against itself cannot stand. So how could it investigate itself?
Well, and for your situation, and this is relevant to all of our National Guard personnel, regardless of what state they're in, here's a question. I don't know if you even considered this. Which IG would you even file a complaint with? You're a Title 10, you're a Title 32, you're a Title 5 dual status. Is there an IG that even exists within the Department of Defense system that would look at your complaint and say, yes, I have jurisdiction over this?
Yes, very good question. So the way the law reads, the governor has the overall military authority, and there is what's called a 138 complaint. The Section 138 complaint, it's pretty standard throughout the states that appeals all the way to the governor. But remember, the governor hired the adjutant general that sits on, in this particular one, on her staff. So another case where I just go, how realistic is this going to be that it's going to be looked at in a fair and balanced way? And I did not even bother with that. I have not even bothered with the military side because it goes on the active duty side. Active duty and guard typically, from my experience, and I can't say this is a thing, but they typically try to stay out of each other's business. So one does not want to rule over the other. So you're getting the fingers pointing back and forth. It's not effective.
Now, how about the civil route? And this is going to show a little bit of my ignorance, but we know very well that Title 10, because of some of the abhorrent laws that have been written as in case precedent that has been set in the past, speaking, of course, Ferry's Doctrine, Westfall Act, Navy v. Egan's another one I just hate. Do you have any more latitude as you're maneuvering in these statuses to prosecute an attack on the civil side?
So yes, I do. A little bit more. Again, I have not seen a case where a Title 32 dual status employed by the state, or administered, I should say, by the state, was able to successfully file, prosecute, and win a civil suit. So that's breaking ground as well, which is probably why it's difficult to find someone to do it. So that's forthcoming.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, you're the second guest on our show, Cinco, but we've got so many fans out there. I've actually got a reader mail for you. So this is a question to you from one of our fans.
Ooh,
So
ooh.
we're going to stop blathering here and send it out to a fellow guards person you may know. Who knows? He or she writes, they're going through a very similar thing in their state. In fact, they were removed, and the rationale reasons were murky at best. And when they attempted to seek recourse redress through the state system, sure enough, just as you described a few minutes ago, the governor hires the adjutant general. They're all buddy-buddy. It's very nepotistic and ancestral system. They circle the wagons and, of course, provide that person no recourse. In fact, violating their own state Article 132 in doing so. That I have seen. However, the question is, they're trying to figure out and mash through some potential root cause fixes here. So we have policy gaps along with no accountability enforcement mechanisms. What we struggle with is the solution. While the feds could, if they chose to enforce, cut manning and funding, it would take years for that enforcement to be felt, and congressional delegations roll in and stop it. They could also pull the federal recognition of individual leaders who violate guidance, but that turns into a whack-a-mole game and does nothing to the governor, who is ultimately responsible for her militias. Following my call with my counsel, I'm attempting to shift this paradigm. While he and I have continued to work through reactive options, we have not grappled with proactive solutions that address root causes. Do you have any ideas or know if any research has been done on this? And that comes from a Walk the Talk Foundation fan.
Thank you for that. So I would say when you look at, and I'm going to say, I have been through the gauntlet in both active duty and guard. So I think that I can compare fairly side by side. It took 7 years to get through the active duty side. And that's, like I said, another show. But I had some advantages that way because there were some senior officers that helped me, right? And people time out faster on active duty, typically 2 or 3 years. The people who push through something have typically gone. And if you stay, and I'll make this point right now, chances are if you decide to fight, you're probably going to win it. There's a really good chance if you stay and fight, and this is a campaign, it's over a long period of time, and you got to take this on, and I'll get to more of that in a little bit, but I have done it on both sides. So on active duty, I probably don't have the civil side to help me out, probably not as much media, but I have the system of officers that I've known for a while to help me out in my case. On the guard side, I don't have it's much more political, and it can end very quickly because you are viewed as a political asset much more than you are on active duty. But I have access to, in this case, the civil service side, in my opinion, or on my side, and the media, which I have seen that work pretty well with some folks. So there's a balance here. As far as coming up with a real solution, I would say there's two things. If we give every guardsman an ability to appeal a case from their Title 32 drill status guardsman to the federal level on more occasions, we broaden that appeal outside of just merit system or EO complaints, because those are the only two right now. I think that we will have a much better system of accountability for military members. That is the only thing that I can think of at this moment.
Yeah, that's great. And your solution kind of parallels what Cheska and I have worked on for the past few years now, is if you have something like a court, right? And I'm not saying it's court, something that's independent, that the decision is made by a jury, not an entity that plays judge, jury, executioner. You will see, I think, initially an influx of seekings of recourse, restitution, but by those decisions, it will change the behavior of the organization, the leaders therein, right? So there'll be some growing pains, but eventually when leaders of the military, and we see this on the active duty side, when they realize they can't act with impunity, they can't violate the law and the Constitution without being held accountable, which is happening now. If we can just get that to start, they will change the way they act, but they won't do it of their own volition. It sounds like the proposal you're pitching here is basically same church, different pew, very much the same flavor. Yeah.
And we've already done it with increasing the amount of appeal authority for a dual status technician, Title 32. So why can't we do it for a Title 32 drill status guardsman, which everybody in the guard is, militarily?
Love it.
Or even your Title 10 people. So
That's right.
last question. For everything that's happened to you, including being embarrassed, I mean, I can't even imagine coming to work and having armed guards waiting there to and I'm guessing, of course, these armed guards were junior to you, which is probably even more mortifying and embarrassing. I'm guessing they weren't O6s, as fellow O6s, is that right?
They,
Right?
they were civilian folks. They were
Ah,
just doing their job, but you're right.
but yeah, so it's pretty embarrassing.
It was.
Public,
But page out of the playbook,
right?
right? Isolate,
Isolate, exactly.
right?
Because then no
Yep.
one's going to say anything because now they're petrified because they don't want to get escorted out of the building
Yeah.
under armed
They don't
guards.
want the collateral damage, right? You're a pariah now.
100%.
You're
Yep.
radioactive.
All of
Yep. It's
that.
playbook. Yep.
So, and you never made a complaint. You were just doing your job. You had just a month or so prior gotten a great performance evaluation, top mark on your performance evaluation. So now this has happened. In this whole process, what sort of help have you received from inside the organization that is the National Guard of the Department of Defense? Who has been your advocate? Or have you had to find your advocate through your wallet, your paycheck, to spend thousands of dollars to try to bring back your good name?
I've had no advocate inside the military. This is all external. That's the short answer to your question. And it's all on me to spend the money to find an attorney to go forward. I've had zero help.
Yeah. And for, we were, I'm going to get on my soapbox here. Something that happens from time to time on this show. I was watching the Secretary of Defense confirmation hearings, the political theater, which was those hearings. And I listened to these members of the SASC purport how much they care about the military member, the plight of them, especially minorities and females. But these are the same people, the same SASC that we go to. We go, there are two systems of justice, again, air quotes, in the military. The impacts and the ramifications, as you've heard in this show, incredibly serious that circumvent any UCMJ Uniform Code of Military Justice process. There's no trial. There's no court
There's
martial.
no paperwork.
There's no paper. There's not even a piece of paper. And we go to the SASC and we go, this is happening to tens of thousands of service members. No exaggeration. And some pretty fucking stellar people. Pardon the French here. Sorry, Cheska's mom. And they kind of go, meh. Or, my fave, what we got, meh, write your own legislation, end quote, from one of our SASC staffer friends. And I watch these hearings about how much they care about. It's bullshit. It's crap. And it's infuriating because now I think about the E6 out there, guard or active duty, or the O2, O3, awesome. They're ready to serve. They're proud to serve. They got an incredible amount of potential. They cross somebody and they're run out of the military, and they have no chance in hell of surviving that because the system is set up like that, and or shell out tens of thousands of dollars for justice, whereas an accused rapist is getting military defense counsel on the government's dime. It's just heinous. End of soapbox rant.
And the mental health implications. That'll be my soapbox rant. Very short one. But the mental health, so those people that are run out of the military, Cinco, you have a long and distinguished career that you can look back on and say, you know what, I did some really cool things. I commanded at every echelon. I'm an Air Force Academy grad. I'm one of the cool guys. I'm an F-16 pilot, right? So you can, even at your lowest point, and this isn't minimizing any of the trauma or the moral injury that you've endured, Even at your lowest point, though, you have some sort of thing to look back on. But when we're talking about our E5s, E6s, O1s, O2s, they don't have that to fall back on. And they're just getting gaslit. They're getting told how terrible they are. They're getting fired, all this stuff. And then they get kicked out of the military. Those are your people, those are your veterans that are on the streets, or they're alcoholics, or that commit suicide. I mean, it
23% by the last
yep,
report of suicides were involved in some administrative process slash investigation. The threat is
right.
real.
The threat is real. So, Cinco, I want to give you the last word because I know you said up front that part of this podcast is a message to your wing, which you should maybe not now, it's been a little while, typical 2 year, 3 year command. But if you had not been given an armed escort to exit the building with zero justification, zero paperwork, what would you, what would you like to say to your wing?
I have something else. I'm going to talk about something I touched on earlier, and you guys can work this in. I think we in uniform, we feel moral terror when we are treated by this way by the organization. We are brought in as this is your family. We are brothers and sisters in arms, and we put our complete trust to our lives. And when we realize that this is happening to us, it tears us apart. But we have to realize too that these are human organizations. The DoD is nothing more than a federal agency.
Hmm.
The military units themselves are not, but the administrative side, I think it is because it's part of the government. It has a seat at the table. That's arguable. It's geared to protect its own self, its self-interests. But we have to remember we took an oath to the Constitution for both enemies, foreign and domestic. And you see that has happened in the last couple of years. There are domestic enemies, right? We have people inside the country that may don't believe in our morals and values. And we got to remember also the code of conduct, in my opinion, I was just thinking about this the other day. Maybe it applies to that part of it too, our oath. And I'll go to Article 6. I'll never forget that I'm an American fighting for freedom, responsible for my actions, and dedicated to the principles which made my country free. I will trust in my God in the United States of America. And that's what we take our oath to, not to the government, to the Constitution. If we remember that, I think we can band together when we all folks who realize these things, we come together and say, this happened to me, this happened to me. We start talking, we decide to fight, and we don't run away when it's time to help somebody in trouble, because that typically is what happened. I became a pariah, right?
Hmm.
No one talked to me.
Yep.
Part of that was a gag order, but for the wing, which I'll get to in a second. But I believe that we have to really change our mindset to start fighting this as a group of veterans and a group of people in uniform. Because again, we fight for the Constitution. It's different than in other countries. Okay, and here's what I would say to the wing. Red Tails, I miss you every day. You were told that they wanted the next person in place for the F-35, which is why I was removed. Does that make sense? No. Second, you were told I was talking too much about space and cyber. Does that make sense? No. Then they told you I disobeyed orders and I signed documents there as such. No way. That did not happen. Fourth, you were told that because of our operational readiness inspection results, we uncovered too many things. I created too many disturbances. Negative. We got a great return, great report on that inspection, and we blazed paths. So it was nothing from that. So it comes down to the usual suspects after that. He must have done something. He must have had some kind of thing happen where he broke the law. Nothing. Just to say someone is removed for cause, there has to be justification. And that's where you have to look beyond. And it's amazing how many people will leave you when you get into trouble. And I'll tell you that hurt deeply. I know because you all, many of you still write to me and contact me on a regular basis, even to this day. And let's see what God does. But I ain't stopping. And I'm going to fight this and continue to do it because it's the right thing to do. Because we have to be ready. As I've always said, we got to be ready to fight.
No, that's a powerful message, Cinco, and I appreciate it. And Ryan and I, yeah,
Love
we
it.
both, As we stated up front, we'll state again, we'll do a thank you sandwich. So thank you for being on our show. Thank you for sharing your journey and your moral injury. So hopefully we didn't re-traumatize you too much through this show. Uh, or anybody that's listening. But thank you for that. And Ryan, closing comments to you, sir.
No, well said, Cinco, and thanks for coming on. Against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Amen.
Amen. And if I will tell you guys, it's
All
all
right.
been worth it, because I am a strong Christian, but now my faith goes so deep because God's shaped me through all of it. I wouldn't ask for it, but I would do it again to get this result. No kidding.
Well, you are a powerhouse, sir, and we will look forward to hearing more about you, and we'll look forward to hearing all the legislation you're helping write and the people that this episode is helping, just by even just understanding the spaghetti bowl that is
Love
the
it.
National the wild West that is the National Guard.
Love it.
So thank you all of our listeners for tuning in, and we will see you next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Well, that's it for this week's topic. We really appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check out our foundation website at walkthetalkfoundation.org.
And feel free to reach out and give us feedback. You can get a hold of us via Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and our foundation's website. Details in the description section. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next episode.